Okay, I'm going to start then. So welcome to our Bridging the Divide and the Open Discussion Project webinar. The webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Our speakers will present, and then they'll be answering your questions at the end. While Sarah and Chris present, we're going to mute your sound. If you know how to do that already by clicking on the microphone on the bottom or side of your screen, please go ahead. Please use the chat function to ask your questions. You'll see the chat option, most likely, on the bottom or side of your screen. When you click on it, the chat box will open. Please choose the Write to Everyone option so we'll see your question. Feel free to write your questions during the presentation because Wanda will be monitoring the chat. You're welcome to keep your video on so we can see you. It's nice to see everyone's faces. However, if you need to multitask, like eat lunch or take calls, then please turn your video off so we aren't distracted. Please choose the Stop Video button, which is usually located next to the mute or microphone. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Sarah Godin is General Manager of Quail Ridge Books, a 9,000 square foot store in Raleigh, North Carolina. She has been a bookseller for 40 years, starting with Walden Books in 1978, then opening and running her own store, Wellington's Books, in Cary for 10 years. Finally landing at Quail Ridge Books in 1996. Sarah has served on various ABA committees, such as the Booksellers Advisory Council, Education and Abacus Task Forces, and is chair of the Spring 2017 Indies Introduce Adult Book Selection Committee. Chris Finan is Executive Director of the National Coalition Against Censorship, an alliance of 56 national nonprofits, including the American Booksellers Association. He has defended the First Amendment rights of booksellers for many years, and most recently led American Booksellers for Free Expression. He is the author of From the Palmer Raids to the Patriot Act, A History of the Fight for Free Speech in America. His new book is Drunks, An American History, which will be released in paperback on June 5th. Okay, so it's over to you, Sarah. Did you want to begin?
You hear me? You can, great. Okay. Hi, everybody. So this all came about because about a year and a half ago, we had an author, Rupert Nacost, who is a local professor at NC State University, who had a book called Taking on Diversity, Moving from Anxiety to Respect. And we had some sessions at the store based on that book, talking about how to relate to people from diverse backgrounds and just have a society that's more in tune with that. And Chris picked up on that, and he and I got together at Book Expo just to talk about that and other things that we can do. Just that this was, I guess, not last year, but the year before at Book Expo, I believe it was, 2 years ago. And after that, I left inspired, thinking, what can we do at the store? And came up with the idea of the book club that we've been running for about a year now, called Bridging the Divide, whose aim is to connect people across the political spectrum in a way that helps them understand why people can think so differently from they do without demonizing them. And there are a lot of other people who are doing this in a lot of different ways. And this was just a small way that we thought we could do it, focused on books and provide a place, because I think bookstores generally are places that people feel are safe environments and that they can express themselves, and that the discussion won't necessarily get out of hand. Whereas in another environment, it might be, you might feel less secure about that. So we came up with the idea, and we went around trying to find moderators who would be good and would be able to present well, but also lead discussions and could help us pick books. I say we, Renee Martin, who's our events coordinator, helped me at the beginning on this, trying to find some moderators. And we came up with two main moderators. One is Corey Swanson, and he is the president of our local John Locke Foundation. He's very well read. They bring in a lot of authors, very conservative. And so I thought that would be a wonderful match for the conservative person. The liberal person was actually a little harder to come up with. We came up with a great guy who was the political reporter for the Raleigh News and Observer, but the News and Observer didn't really want him identified as being a liberal spokesperson, because they try to be a more neutral paper, at least in their reporting, if not in their editorial pages. So we kind of changed our focus to say it wasn't going to be a, red, blue, liberal, conservative, but more of a mix across the political spectrum. And with that, they were okay with it, and we proceeded. And it started with a bang. This was May a year ago. Our first 3 meetings, we had 50 people, 45 people, 87 people, just huge turnouts. And then it kind of all settled into finding it much harder to get big turnouts. Our next meetings, we had far fewer people. 23, 6, 25, 2. I think 2 was the one that Chris actually came to. And in addition to, we had the moderators and me, and then Chris and a friend of his, and then 2 other people. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is all sort of dwindled away. What are we going to do? Since then, it's kind of rebounded. It's taken some work to do that. We've settled into the last few meetings we've had between 20 and 30 people, averaging about 25. Which is really a better number than 50 and 87 because it's really hard to have a meaningful conversation with that many people. Our other big challenge has been getting conservatives to attend because we have a pretty liberal base of our customers. We have a lot of conservative customers too, but they weren't coming to the meetings. And when I asked our moderator why he thought that was, he thought that it was because they didn't have a sense of trust, that they wouldn't be sort of kind of attacked by the liberals for not understanding, and that they felt bookstores and independent bookstores specifically were sort of liberal havens and not necessarily open and welcoming of conservative viewpoints. And I've talked to other people who have done this, not with books necessarily, but other kinds of gatherings like this in other parts of the country, and they have had that same experience, that it's very difficult to get the conservative buy-in. When we finally did, because I feel like we have moved beyond that, I think part of it was book selection and then some specific reaching out to specific people and saying, please come, and encourage people to come. And the book that first kind of turned it around was a book called The Intimidation Game, How the Left Silences Free Speech, which any conservative would probably feel like, right on, that's a great book to talk about. And we did have good conservative turnout at that one, and through that kind of and nurturing those connections has meant that we've had it at the next few. Another challenge was finding moderators who could really lead the discussion, because most people are used to presenting but not really drawing other people out. So that's been a challenge, working with them on those skills. And then the third challenge has been finding good books. So I'll just leave it there for the overview, and then I can go into more detail as people have questions, but turn it over to Chris to talk about his part of it.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. It's symbolic you handing off to me, since that's what you've been doing with this whole program. Actually, the Open Discussion Project originated in some conversations that I had with Orrin Teicher and Dan Cullen when I was still on the ABA staff. I left ABA a year ago to become executive director of National Coalition Against Censorship. But in the immediate aftermath of the election, we were sitting in his office thinking about what's the best thing that how can we help booksellers orient themselves in a world that has become so partisan. And we agree that books are what we do, and supplying books to the marketplace of ideas is what has distinguished booksellers and their role in free speech since the beginning. So we would just double down on that, and although we would make a more concerted effort to develop materials that reached out to both the left and the right. And the idea of the book groups came along a little more slowly. We were originally talking about reading lists, and so when I first talked to Sarah, which I think was at Winter Institute, to find out more about her friend, is a professor at North Carolina State. We really didn't have a concrete plan for going forward with reading groups. So I was very surprised when several months later, Sarah called me and said, well, we got one. And I said, well, how's that going? And so I've been following her progress ever since, and she's done a great job of pioneering this and teaching us the issues that we need to resolve before we roll this out on a bigger level. But what we have found, so really the purpose of the Open Discussion Project is to address this polarization in our society, which everybody bemoans, and nobody really seems to know what to do about. And that's an exaggeration because, as Sarah points out, there are in fact a number of groups, both national and local throughout the country, that are trying to encourage what they refer to as dialogue. And this is a very specific kind of communication. It's not a debate. It's really not a discussion. It's really an effort to get people to recognize each other as human beings with many of the same concerns, moving past stereotypes of left and right, and really engaging and explaining their views, so that the goal of this dialogue, and I think the goal of bridging the divide, Sarah will agree, is not to change minds. It is really to establish common ground and greater tolerance and a willingness to listen to the other side and empathetically, and to cultivate empathy, which is now also a word that you hear a lot. So our plan is for the Open Discussion Project is to launch a pilot phase in October with between 6 and 8 stores. We've talked to 8 stores, 6 have agreed to come on, that we chose based on where they were in the country. We wanted to choose stores in swing districts where there would be the closest partisan balance, and hopefully that would help us put people in the seats. We are going to, National Coalition Against Censorship has now taken on this project jointly with ABA, and we will do the main coordinating of the project. In the beginning, we don't have any extra staff for this, so we're going to try to staff it out of what's already a pretty small nonprofit. But we are ambitious about this. We think that we can find the resources that we need to then roll this out after another year, basically, of testing and figuring out what is the best way to identify the facilitators, what's the best way to choose the reading material, that we will be in a position in 2019 to be able to bring in any bookstore that wants to participate. And I should say now, if anybody on this call wants to join in the pilot project, they're certainly welcome. We're just, frankly, at this point, we're somewhat limited in our own resources. We are applying for grants to try to pay for a staff person to work full-time on this, and we're just getting started with that. We also have established contact with a couple of national groups that have long experience in this. This whole idea of dialogue actually goes back to the 1990s. I mean, we think that we have, that polarization is terrible now, and it is, but it has been for quite a while. And it was against that background in the 80s that social scientists began to explore this concept, and it began to be applied. So one of the groups that we have been talking to is a group called the National Institute for Civil Discourse. There's another group called the National Coalition for Dialogue and Debate. And they have extensive resources that we are going to plunder for everything that they're worth. We are very hopeful, and based on, Sarah's experience, the fact that the conservatives didn't instantly show up, of course, was a little disappointing, but we should have known better, right? I mean, it's scary for somebody to walk into an environment where they think they're going to be in a minority. And in our current political culture, get the heck pounded out of them by people from the other side. So we've learned a lot about how we need to market to conservatives, how we need to reach out to them. We are in touch with conservative groups on a national basis too that we think will help us. So we're very hopeful. We're very excited about it, and of course, from my own personal point of view, it's great to be working with booksellers again. So, we'll take any questions that anybody has at this point.
I do.
Yeah.
I would be interested to hear from the group of people, I guess 2 or 3 things. One, is this something that appeals to them to do? 2, that they can identify. And 3, along with what you're doing, Chris, how could SEBA, I don't want to duplicate efforts, but what could SEBA do for her stores that would feel the most valuable? I would love to hear about sort of that. What are people's obstacles to doing something like this? And what do they feel that they need support-wise that SEBA maybe could fill in a gap where for y'all and for the stores?
So you want to take those in order?
Sure.
I think the first question was addressed to the booksellers, right?
Right. And do any of them feel like this is something they would like to do, but it makes them anxious to contemplate it? Because that's kind of what happens to me. Dolores just said she's listening, but she has her camera off. She's got people in the store. She's interested. Roanoke did a similar program on community last year. So it doesn't sound like Dolores has anxiety about it, but it is something she would like to do at her store.
Great.
What is Dolores' store? Is it coming to mind, Linda Marie? Dolores, tell me the name of your store. Book No Further. Book No Further. Great name. She said she would love to have partners in play. So is one of the things, Chris, that y'all are working on doing is sort of resourcing moderators? And Sarah, would you maybe, with Rupert's help, do you already have something that kind of identifies what a moderator needs to do and know and sort of the guidelines for moderators?
Sure, I'll answer that. So Rupert actually does have a couple of papers that he developed for his classes on dealing with people from diverse backgrounds and moderating group discussion. I found that the moderators that we had were not, I think they sort of thought they had it, and it was going to be fine, and I don't think they paid a lot of attention to that. And I also just think reading the papers is one thing, but doing it in practice is another. So even though my original idea was, oh, I'm just going to start this and hand it off to the moderators and they're going to take it from here, I really do feel that somebody from the store who has some experience moderating groups does need to be present and help with that, especially the first few times for each moderator, because unless they really have done that, and if you do get somebody who is, say, a professor at a local university, that's great. They're usually going to be fine with that. But the other people, if you get somebody who's a politician or in the political world, they are usually much more comfortable doing presentations and not soliciting, responses from the group. And I think there's a lot that, and also a really important thing to do is to ask for feedback from the group to you personally and privately afterwards, because I got a lot of that after the first few times, and some of it was frustration with the moderators. And I was able to give them some tips, and also just to jump in a little bit myself when they were going on a little bit too long at the beginning, making the presentation saying, well, wouldn't it be great to hear from somebody right now? Or, can we hear from somebody who hasn't spoken? Because it's also difficult, if you're not used to it, to keep someone from dominating the group, who's just come as an attendee as well.
So we're hearing from folks on the chat. So we have a store that's strongly interested in this project. They've been working over ideas for something along these lines over the past year. This organized effort is most welcome. They feel they hold on, I got muted and it covered up what I was reading. Given the outsized influence of Jerry Falwell's Liberty University here in town. And it seems like that we couldn't have any trouble getting the conservatives to show up if Liberty University is there. And it does seem like a great place to offer something like this. That's easy feeling. And then, where's that noise? Is that still Sarah? Can I mute Sarah for a second? Okay, thank you, Sarah. And then Braca from Quail Ridge is interested in doing this with the community in the future, though not necessarily at a store. Though organized and promoted via an indie store, I would love to hear thoughts on taking discussions outside of a store location, maybe to someplace more neutral. I guess because bookstores are probably considered bastions of liberalness. I would also like to hear more about what community groups people have reached out to who have been most receptive to attending and working together. I wonder, I'm thinking, I'm taking this a step further in my head. I wonder if there isn't somebody like Rupert. I mean, there's got to be more than, I know we got to have more like Rupert-like people that we could kind of take on the road and sort of
model a program.
Not exactly, yeah, a program that was kind of move across the state, across the territory in some fashion.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility if we can raise some money to pay travel and any other expenses. But let me go back to what Sarah was saying about the difficulty of getting the moderation right. We identified this as a problem, right from the beginning, and we actually imagined, because this is a special skill. This isn't just, we need people who are leading from behind, who are encouraging people to talk, and who know how to push past when there's nothing being said, who know how to get the conversation going again. So there are, in fact, professional mediators who have in the past volunteered to do this pro bono for the National Institute for Civil Discourse. In fact, they tell me they have 1,700 people on their list, which sounds like they've got somebody close to a bookstore in almost everywhere. So we are working out a relationship with NICD that that will help us get access to that to that list and be able to make it available to stores that want to participate. And going back to that question about taking it out of the store, I think when that's possible, I think that really is a good idea. And I think partnering with another organization that is more nonpartisan. We originally thought about the League of Women Voters and other PTA, other local groups that might be willing to do this. I don't, at this point, have a good sense of who the other players, community players, are most active. But we can certainly find out. We have thought that libraries are not a bad venue. Libraries have their own conservative critics, but I think they're probably a shade less, concerning to conservatives than bookstores. But I also wouldn't be discouraged from trying to get started in the bookstore, because I think if we get started in the right way, if we market in the right way, we'll have the success that Sarah has had. I mean, Sarah's shown that it does work in a bookstore.
I was going to mention as well to Braca's question about taking it outside the store. Chris put me in touch with somebody who's involved with a group here in the Triangle called Reweaving the Social Fabric. And they have meetups about all sorts of different things in all sorts of different places. They're run by volunteers, but they do some similar things to what we're doing. And that might be a good model to look at for that, because they meet at Weaver Street or all sorts, and they try to not just bridge the the conservative liberal divide, they're also talking about young and old and different groups getting together. But I think that would be a good model to look at as well.
So, Sarah, we have someone asking, can you kind of explain the schedule of how often you do this?
Sure.
Is it a monthly meeting? Is it bi-monthly?
Yeah. No, we meet once a month, first Wednesday of every month. We will be skipping a couple months this summer, which I don't think will not, I would be a little worried about that losing the momentum, but it's July and August, and then we're coming back in September with a book on the gun debate. So I think that will draw a crowd regardless. And we actually have some other things going on in August. We have a good author who's appearing about how to come up with reasonable arguments and define your position and stuff, and is also very interested in civil discourse. So that will be a sort of an alternative event there. But we meet monthly, and I would prefer to list the books out well ahead of time, but that hasn't happened because we were really experimenting with what worked and what didn't as far as book selection. So we were going just 2 months ahead and are still doing that. And I'm glad we did because we learned a lot from the first few books. And for instance, we had a very wonky book by a conservative philosopher, and even though we sold quite a few of the books, that was the one meeting where only a couple of people showed up because it was a very intimidating book and also a very boring one. So we found that the books that have worked are either very issue-oriented, although in that case, you're often going to get people who are only interested in that issue who don't come back. And what I really like about our group now is we have each meeting about maybe 2/3 people who have been coming regularly and 1/3 new people, which is a great mix. But if you always have new people, it's really hard to get much of a dialogue or trust
Right.
with that. So, but I was going to say too, as a follow-up, I have a list of all the books we've done and just information on our setup and how we went about it that I can email to anybody who's interested. If they just send me an email at sarah@claridgebooks.com, I can send
And
it.
if you're willing to share it with Linda Marie,
Absolutely, yeah.
to everybody, I mean, anybody who wants it. I would also be interested in the titles, kind of what titles you're considering, what titles you've already done.
Yeah.
Kind of if you have a formula. I mean, do you read them and pick them? Do you have
I do read all of them. I didn't finish that one I was talking about, but I pick them in collaboration with the moderators, or I always at every meeting say, please send me your book suggestions if you have any ideas for books.
And they would also like on that list titles that did not work well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And someone shared here that last year, this is Dolores again. This is hold on, I can't look no further. So this is cool. They had a program of 10 events on Dar Williams, What I Learned in 1,000 Towns. And they partnered with 10 groups around town and each hosted a chapter from the book. And it culminated at the marketplace outside my door in December. They had about 150 people involved across the program. So Dolores, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I am. Okay, I can hear you.
Can you, so did you put this together?
It was a cooperation between a group called Book City Roanoke, which is a nonprofit for all things literate, and the Virginia Department of Community Development, because the fellow who runs Book City Roanoke had access to some grant funds through that. And of course it was community development. And Dar Williams did come to the final event, and it was a moderated discussion with Beth Macy, who wrote True Vine and Factory Man.
Yeah, cool, very cool. And did they come to you with the idea, or did you partner?
It was about the time we were opening, and it came from a conversation I was having with the Book City Roanoke fellow before it started, and we partnered. The thing about the chapters was each chapter focused on a kind of development the city could do, like outdoor spaces. One of them was at the food place in town. There was the food bank place. There was one for the arts, one for downtown areas, all those kind of things. So an appropriate group hosted each one.
That's very cool. I don't even know that book. So I want to read that book. Okay. Thank you.
Looks like Linda Marie was talking, but I didn't hear anything.
Linda Marie, you're muted.
I know, I just realized that. Sorry. I was very Sarah, I was curious about the standout events, the ones that were particularly good, why they were so great.
In our meetings, did you say? Okay, yeah. That's a good question. So, well, we did, I think one thing is books that a lot of people have already read and feel passionate about. So Hillbilly Elegy was one. That's when we had the 87 people, because we had sold hundreds of copies of that book and people wanted to talk about it. And also we had a couple of kind of guest star moderators who were not particularly great moderators, but they did draw a crowd. So that was a great pull for people to come, but wasn't necessarily such a good discussion. And I did have people after that give me feedback that they were frustrated, that they didn't feel like the discussion was that good. Also, Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me, I thought was a good discussion because, again, we had sold a lot of copies of the book and people were eager to talk about it. But we didn't have a very diverse group then, the moderator and one African-American attendee. One of our very best discussions, the first good discussion, was for a book called How Culture Shapes the Climate Change Debate, which sounds really boring, but it's a very short book put out by Stanford Briefs, and it's about how we identify with issues based on who we like as opposed to, and who we feel shares our positions on other things. And we had a great discussion, a lot of kind of aha moments, excuse me, by people who attended. And in particular, there was a woman there and an older gentleman who I didn't realize until afterwards were related. They were not even sitting together. But she came up to me afterwards and said, you know, that was my dad. He's a nuclear engineer, and I'm a very liberal, and we can't talk about this at home. So we had to come here to have a civil discussion about it, and now we have a much better understanding about how each other feels. Because he was quite outspoken during the meeting about issues about nuclear power and how people painted them with a certain brush without really investigating the issues. So that was definitely a high point. But there have been, since then, and since we've kind of gotten it to about the 25 to 30 people and gotten a more diverse group, there have actually been quite a few sort of aha moments where, for instance, during the How the Left Silences Free Speech, a very conservative member asked a very liberal, outspoken member, why did you said it made you uncomfortable? Why did it make you so uncomfortable? Did you feel like it was inaccurate? Did you think this or that? And the other person was really struggling to say why, but that led to a real discussion of how we feel so strongly and how books are written in certain ways. Dark Money, we had done just the month before, was completely the opposite, and a conservative reading that would have felt just as uncomfortable. So that led to some really good discussion about how hard it is to see things from another's point of view. Those are the kind of things that thrill me anyway.
Do you feel like you have to coach the bookstore staff around holding these events, and if they have to deal with people who are very emotional about the topic?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Not very much, just because we've already had that discussion. We, and I know this is not true of a lot of bookstores, but it is true of ours. We always talk about that we don't make political comments in the bookstore, that we want to be a welcoming place for people across the political divide. And so we've made it a policy to engage in political talk on the floor or with customers. If they bring it up, we don't respond. We just, either smile or say, well, I can understand how you feel that way or something, but we don't start talking politics. And that was really hard to put in place, but we have been pretty firm about it for a long time. When we were doing the first couple of sessions based on Rupert's book, some of the people attending did get very emotional, but that was within the group, not in the bookstore, so that wasn't a problem. And Rupert knew how to handle it, so that was good.
There's something on the chat. It says, has there been any incorporation of possible core differences in why people believe what they do? And then 2 comments about Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind.
Yeah, that was a book we did 2 months ago. Terrific book and a great conversation. And we followed it by Political Tribes by Amy Chua, which was kind of on the same lines, although different. That's a great book to have even maybe as your first book, because it really does talk about why people think, how we're almost in some ways genetically programmed to be on one side or the other.
Sorry, I had an emergency, so I got it fixed now, but that's why I didn't attend to that.
Chris, I didn't know if you wanted to add more to the discussion. Chris,
I'm sorry, were you talking to me?
Yeah, if there's something we haven't talked about yet.
Well, I just wanted to raise a point that Sarah has made to me, which is that some of the feedback after the programs has been that people would like another kind of book, that something that is more objective, doesn't have such a clearly defined point of view, and you know, it's hard to know exactly where to find. I mean, I don't think at this point, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, that you found exactly that. But we have been in conversations with an editor at Macmillan about the possibility of creating a series of books for the Open Discussion Project, and you know, we're going to be. You know, the question is what's the best format, and we're going to be experimenting with that, you know, during this first year.
Yeah, I think it would be fabulous to have a series of short books or even one book that had chapters throughout it. Of course, it would be dated fairly quickly, but maybe not. I mean, some of the books that we've done are several years old and still very pertinent. But it has been difficult to find the right books, and I think attendees have made several times the comment, wouldn't it be great to have a book on this that wasn't so partisan, and then we could have a better discussion without having to get over these hurdles of how they're expressing. You know, the way Jane Mayer talks about the Koch brothers is the same way Kimberly Strassel in the How the Left Silences Free Speech is talking about some liberal icons like Obama, which makes them uncomfortable, and that does require getting over that before you can really get into the issues or understand how other people think. On the other hand, it can be also useful to talk about those feelings too, but choosing the books has been difficult, and it would be great to have more options for that. Yeah.
Have you read any biographies of politicians? Would that be like the Lincoln biography? I'm trying to think of the woman who writes the great biographies.
Doris Kearns Goodwin?
Yes, Doris Kearns Goodwin. Would she be considered a liberal or a conservative by people?
I don't know. That's an interesting thought. We've gone with more contemporary things, but that's something worth considering. Because
I feel like a lot of, I mean, for me, I mean, I had never read a presidential biography in my life. You know, now I am reading them because I just, you know, I had all these fears around, you know, thinking this had never happened before, and you know, this is terrible, and whatever my feelings were around it. Just trying to get some comfort in what has happened before, you know. You know, we're a resilient country, so you know, just I wonder if that would allow for any conversation as to just our expectations and what we think about today. Do we have? I wonder how many, maybe the people who show up for something like this already have a lot of historical understanding.
I think some do and some don't. Yeah, it'd be hard to say everybody does. John,
But I certainly didn't. And I would love an opportunity to do that with a group of people.
Yeah.
I'm interested in goal in increasing participation across demographic conversation, more exposure between different races, socioeconomics, perhaps partner with local groups with that focus. I mean, it would be really cool if you could even do things like, I mean, I don't know how to do it, but even like HUD, you know, where you are able to offer conversations with people who, you know, have had struggles with finding housing, you know, finding homes, and you know what their point of view is on, you know, something like, you know, things that I may find very worrisome. You know, they have much bigger worries than that.
Yeah, I think to do something like that, you definitely would have a better chance of success moving it out of the bookstore. I think even with when we did Rupert's, the sessions on his book, it's very hard to get people who aren't your customer base to come in regularly for something like that. They're just not, you're not on their radar.
Right.
It takes a lot more work.
And one of Rupert's books is about a book that he assigns to his student to read.
I can't quite hear you.
One of Rupert's books is about,
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Tim Tyson's book, I think.
Yes, that might be a cool book to read too, as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. We've done two on rate. Well, we've done Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, and this month we're doing the new Jim Crow. And so that'll be two on race. That would be an interesting one to add, particularly because it's pertinent to North Carolina for us. And Tim Tyson is very well read. We have a lot of customers who've read his book, and it would open up a big discussion. That would be
Yeah.
I can see other places in the South. Mitch Landrieu's book, I just finished, is the mayor of New Orleans, In the Shadow of Statues, would be a really interesting one for other groups, perhaps.
Yeah, I do think that, you know, as more and more bookstores get involved in this, I imagine each of them will be suggesting some of their own titles, and we will get an experiential, you know, a lot more experience with more books and be able to really make suggestions around to other stores about, you know, because we want to follow up immediately after every session to see how things have gone and be able to recommend books and whatever other ideas have been, you know, have been identified. So, so yeah.
I would love to have more stores doing it and be getting the feedback myself from, you know, ways to get more diverse participation and book suggestions. I think the more of us doing it, the more we'll all learn. That would be great.
Yeah, maybe we can even set up some conference calls, you know, conference calls to get participants.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
So what do y'all think? You know, we're doing the, we're planning to do the bookstore tours when we go to Tampa. But do you think booksellers would have any, well, would this, if I contacted the Tampa stores to see if they would be interested in hosting a community, one of these, scheduling it, get the book out in time, you know, we'd have to start right now, that would booksellers be interested in attending one of these at a store as a consumer of the project, that store's customers? Would that appeal to booksellers to sort of experience the event? I guess I'm trying to figure out, you know, we're going to do, Sarah and Chris, who's at SEBA, I hope he comes there. We're going to do a resource roundtable on the topic. But I'm trying to figure out if there's something we couldn't do that would be a little more meaty, that sort of gave booksellers the experience of attending one of these at a store as part of the bookstore tours.
Well, we originally were thinking of trying to figure out a way for Rupert to come to one of the major book events, whether it was Winter Institute or one of the regionals, and we just weren't able to get the timing right because he is, he's one of the most popular teachers at North Carolina State, and he has huge classes, and he's has very little availability during the week. But if we could find the time, I know Rupert would probably be glad, would be glad to do it. We were going to pay him a fee and pay his travel. So again, there's some economic considerations here, but we could also, well, I think it's definitely an idea worth exploring. I think, for people to see the model.
So I think what I would probably start with, Chris, is get the bookstores that are in the area on a Zoom call with you and me and maybe Sarah, if she's willing, and let them ask their questions to see if they're willing to actually do that.
Yeah.
And then see if we can't get a book and put that together.
I mean, it is kind of a crapshoot because I think the success that Sarah has had to some extent has been a result of the cumulative process of both customers becoming comfortable and talking. So whether we can get a really good discussion going in one session is something we'd have to think about.
I think we have an advantage that SEBA can deliver both part of the audience, the participants, and we probably, of the 100 authors we have at the show, there's probably an author with a book that would be appropriate, and the author could probably be there. So if those things appeal and would draw, then we have a better chance, I think, of a one-off first event being more successful than a lot of other opportunities.
It's definitely worth exploring, I think.
Yeah. Well, and so my question to booksellers is that something that appeals to you to be part of? Yes, no, maybe so. Yes, I've got one thumbs up. Yes. Okay. So we'll pursue it. Sure. Okay, got that. Good, good. Okay, everybody seems pretty positive about that. Appreciate it. I understand. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna, Chris and Sarah, I'll get to work on that right away. Well, probably right after BEA, not right before. Okay?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We covered everything we needed to cover, or was there anything else that you all felt like you didn't get to discuss? Or
Yeah, any more questions or comments people might have?
all right. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thanks, Linda Marie.